Hello, it's me, Ariza Gaming, and today I want to talk about the Oxygen Not Included Spaced Out DLC in general. Now the Frosty Planet pack is coming out on July 18, I wanted to do a quick retrospective on my top 5 favourite features from the Spaced Out expansion, and just talk about what I liked about them, what I want to see from sort of future DLCs, and just overall my thoughts on all of those features. So let's begin. First of all, the star map, and actually being able to explore multiple different planets and multiple different locations across the cluster. This is absolutely fantastic in my opinion, and just the fact that each destination has something different to see, you have different biomes, different resources available, different critters. It really, I think, increases the diversity of what a typical playthrough actually sort of looks like. Because in the base game, when you're on the classic asteroid, you're sort of running around, you've got access to more or less everything on your asteroid, so you can build a base designed around having access to everything. Whereas in Spaced Out, you might need to go to certain asteroids to get certain resources. And these aren't just advanced resources, these could be basic things like reed fiber, or oil, or refined metals, or anything like that really. So you have to plan your initial base development around different constraints to usual, and I think that can be quite enjoyable. We've done a video about all the different asteroid types in both the classic and the Spaced Out layouts, and over the course of my various streamed runs, I've really enjoyed the Spaced Out runs where we've been hopping from asteroid to asteroid, and we've had to design our bases a little bit differently than usual to get everything to work, like on Flip Farters, where we went to the flipped asteroid to start, and we had to figure out a way to leave that asteroid and then colonize all the other places and eventually set up our nuclear reactor. Or the arboreal airheads when we were on a Folia asteroid and we had an interesting forest start without the usual quirks of the Vedante regular oil. So another thing that I like about the Spaced Out cluster design is generally it's a little bit better in terms of game performance. On a classic asteroid, everything can get really laggy sometimes towards the late game. You have a lot of space and a lot of resources on that single asteroid, so you're going to be quite tempted to print a lot of duplicates, or perhaps have a load of unmixed gases, or just have a load of critters running around. And that can all lead to lag, whereas in the Spaced Out clusters you have less space and thus you tend to produce less lag, and you can have a sort of a bit of a cleaner gameplay experience, which I quite like. Initially, I was more of a fan of the classic experience because I had access to everything I wanted to do. But later on, I've started to like the Spaced Out more just because it's a bit more constrained, and it means I can set myself sort of reasonable goals, and the performance of the game doesn't tend to come into that equation for too long. Whereas if I start a Spaced Out playthrough, the performance impact doesn't really kick in until much later, so I feel like I've got a bit more time where there's less dupes running around and the gameplay feels smoother compared to a normal Oxygen Not Included classic experience. But then this is probably because I'm trying to run it on a laptop and I don't have a super high-end PC, but then I can't imagine everyone who plays this game has access to a super high-end PC. So I like that there's options. I like that Spaced Out is a bit more friendly to people with less expensive setups that can enjoy it at an equal opportunity basis compared to classic on a more robust setup. So my next topic that I want to talk about, which is linked to the previous one, is rocket design. Now with the Spaced Out DLC, you can actually design the interior of your rockets, and I think this is really cool for a number of reasons. First of all, the amount of space you have to build with is very limited, and you're designing each rocket to fill a very specific function. It could be to collect orbital research data, it could be to house duplicates temporarily while you're setting up a base and making sure they're comfortable. It could be for like collecting artifacts and hopping around the cluster efficiently and quickly. So all of these different reasons, and the fact that you have relatively little space to work with, means each rocket design tends to end up being quite a bit different, and it's a fun little mini game to solve. They added a bunch of new buildings like the wall toilet and the ladder bed and so on and so forth, to give you a bit of extra variety and give you some extra tools to work with, and just have a different experience than you would with actually trying to design your base. And of course I see everyone melting the rocket walls and building really large rocket interiors that are completely self-sustaining, and I think that's a lot of fun. I would like them to actually add a larger endgame rocket encapsulation that you could have much more stuff in. So you can replicate a similar sort of experience without having to actually like melt the melt the rocket walls. But yeah, I think it's a lot more fun than the regular base game experience, where you just send your rocket to do a certain objective, and the duplicates and how they factor into the rockets are much more. It's much more engaging in Spaced Out. You have to think about what food you're bringing with your duplicates. There's stuff like the dehydrated food that you can think about as well. You've got to make sure that it doesn't spoil when your duplicate is hanging around in space doing whatever they're up to. There's radiation you've got to think about as well. I know I've had a lot of duplicates that have gotten themselves very sick from radiation sickness, flying around in space, getting orbital data. And it's just a much more dynamic experience, and I think it adds another layer to the game, where it's just a different sort of challenge than what you get with the normal base building stuff. And I'm really glad it's there. It's just like a nice little mini game to solve. So, the third topic I want to talk about is Sweetles and Grubs, and generally the whole Sulfur resource loop that has been expanded on in the Spaced Out DLC. So before in the base game, Sulfur was more or less a useless resource. It didn't have a lot of interesting properties, it wasn't very thermally conductive, the heat capacity wasn't particularly exceptional, and there wasn't really anything you could do with it. It was just a byproduct of perhaps your sour gas boilers, or something you just ended up with randomly. But now in the Spaced Out DLC, you can feed this to Sweetles, who could turn the sulfur into sucrose, which you can use in cooking, you can use it for rocket fuel, and you can also feed it to the Grubs, who can then turn that sucrose, or sulfur if you really feel like it, into mud, which is another new resource they've added, that you can turn into dirt and water using a sludge press, or by boiling it. And the long and short of it is, now you have a reason to use sulfur. You can turn it into dirt and water. There's also plants in the DLC that eat the sulfur directly. The grub fruit I like as an alternative to some of the other plants you can get at the start of the game. It's quite heat resistant, so if you have a large amount of sulfur available, if you have a sulfur geyser perhaps, it can solve your farming woes on hotter asteroids. And I just find the loop, feeding the resources to the Sweetles and then having the Grubs come out as a result of that, and feeding them the byproducts from the Sweetles, and then getting the dirt and water that you need for your base out of that interaction is really fun and cool. And I like it a lot, and they're very cute. I have a soft spot for the insect critters anyways. And I do like also that you can handle them in more or less the exact same way as the hatches, so they're very easy to automate. But it's fun. You have some different... it gives you, again, some different things to think about. And the fact that they can tend to plants and improve your farms as well encourages you to not only just have them in ranches, but also spread them throughout your base. Develop systems that mean you can get a grub or a Sweetle in each of your farm rooms on a regular basis. And it's just a fun topic, and I think it really expands on the starting process on a lot of asteroids. Like, initially, a lot of people just go for hatches immediately, but in some circumstances, it might make sense to go for Sweetles and Grubs instead if you have like a sulfur geyser, or there's just a lot of sulfur in your base. There's early game reasons to think about it now. It's not just a result of your sour gas boil in the very late game. So I really like these little dudes, and I think they add a lot to the game. So fourthly, I want to talk about radiation. This is an entirely new system that was added in the Spaced Out DLC that I think adds a lot of interesting gameplay variety. Each asteroid that you go to has a different level of radiation coming in from space. So when your duplicates are wandering around up at the top near your rockets and all of that sort of stuff, you've got to think about like how long they can be out there for and what protective measures they have. Otherwise, they're going to get radiation sickness and they're going to need to go to the bathroom all the time, and they're going to run out of stamina. So I think it helps make each asteroid feel a bit more unique, and having another way of killing germs other than using chlorine or the temperature adds more variety to the gameplay mix again. It gives you some different solutions to different problems, like Wheezeworts before were just used for cooling, but now you can use them for radiation as well. There might be some circumstances where you want to use them just for cooling something down. There might be others where you just want the radiation instead to kill germs or to turn into rad bolts so you can power your science machines. There's several buildings in the Spaced Out DLC that require rad bolts to function. It's a resource that's generated from the radiation with a rad bolt generator, and you've got to power that consistently. So now you've got to develop different systems in your base to use these buildings, and it gives you something different to think about. There's multiple different sources of radiation as well. What do you want to do? Do you want to harvest it from space? Do you want to plant wheezeworts in like a sort of like a triangle shape to try and maximize how much radiation is getting to your generator? The shine bugs that are in the base game, they produce radiation now, so you can ranch them, and you have more of a reason to ranch them because now each bug produces radiation, and you can really get it going and get a large amount of radiation and power, and as well as the solar energy from the shine bug reactor. Or you might find a crashed satellite on the map somewhere that produces a dangerous amount of radiation, and your duplicants are dying trying to get it harvested, but you'd rather do that than set up a big system and you can just harvest it off the bat. Or the whole radioactive biomes where you've got the uranium ore. What do you do with the uranium ore? Do you put it in a centrifuge? Do you feed it to betas so they could turn it into enriched uranium? Do you run it in a nuclear research reactor to get power and heat out of that? Or do you just use the uranium for building stuff because of the insane temperature range that material has? I'll bring it up yet again. Uranium has a melting point that's 1,000 degrees too low, and the devs never fixed it, so I might as well bring it up now in the Spaced Out retrospective video. But all in all, I think the radiation just adds a lot of other interesting gameplay choices to the game, both in the early game and the late game. It's sort of just another system that you think about. The way that radiation interacts with materials as well is very interesting. It incentivizes you to build structures with multiple tile thick layers to block out certain amounts of radiation. It makes you choose different materials for building rooms out of. Lead and plastic are very insulative for radiation, so it gets you to use those in cases where you wouldn't otherwise. Liquids are very good at blocking radiation, so you might end up putting a water tank in your base, like a liquid tank, just to block the radiation from your research reactor or your crashed satellite or something. It just makes you do some interesting things that you wouldn't really be incentivized to do otherwise, and I think it really gets you thinking, and I really enjoy it. And the last thing I want to talk about is the rework to meteors. So in the original game, meteors were just sort of the regolith variety, and your base was getting pounded with them, and you had to set up quite an elaborate system of bunker doors and robo-miners to try and get all the debris cleared without having these massive meteors destroying the top of your base. And it was a lot of effort to set up, and it had to be that way in the base game because space was the end goal. Like, you weren't supposed to get there until the late game. So it was as challenging as possible. Whereas in Spaced Out, you now have a few different options. You can have a run where you are on an asteroid with more dangerous meteors and there's less space travel involved. Or you can have a run where it starts with much simpler meteors, like the oxalite meteors, or slime meteors, or little ice meteors. Stuff that isn't going to actually damage your base, but it's still an opportunity that you can actually harvest and utilize. It incentivizes you to get out into space and start exploring, rather than staying holed up in the same situation. You can still do that if you want to. You can pick a classic style asteroid and have fun with that. But now with how they've changed the meteor system, you have that choice. You can go into space more freely if you want to in a certain run, or you can make it more difficult and annoying by increasing the frequency of the meteors. And they make the planets feel unique. Each planet has different meteor types, and as a result, the solution you have for them might vary drastically between planets. I know in our recent run, the Far-Flung Friends, we've actually been working on meteor defenses, and some asteroids it's relatively simple. We just have some robo-miners, and they can just pick up the debris and send it in a conveyor rail through some tiles to stop it from off-gassing, and then that's sorted. But there's other cases where actually we might require something more robust, like some bunker doors, like if we go back to the regolith asteroid or something. There's still a reason to have that set up. Or we might just ignore the meteors and just manually dig them out if they're not too frequent. And we're just getting started. You have the choice of whether you're going to manage meteors or not, whereas in the original game, If you didn't manage the meteors, they would manage you. So I like that there's more choice, again, involving that. And I think that's just how I feel about Spaced Out in general. It gives you more choice for how you want to play the game as a DLC. You have the option of going into space and doing all of these things and having a more sort of spread out, distributed experience. Or you could go back to the classic asteroid and have a more centralized experience where you're still building the big base and you don't have to leave that much. And I like that it just gives you more options, both in terms of gameplay styles and just in sort of micro choices about what to do. Like, do you use radiation to solve a problem? Do you use Sweetles and Grubs for your food source? There's more options overall, and I really enjoy that. So, looking at the DLC as well, the Frosty Planet pack that's coming out, this seems to be following some similar sort of logic in that it's adding more options for stuff to do. But it does seem to be constrained mostly to the new Frosty biome, the Frosty Planet. It does look like they're allowing biomes from that planet to show up in other planetoids, which I think is good. So it looks like it's generally going to widen the amount of options available. And again, I think it leads to you making more interesting choices. Now that low temperature damage is actually a problem, you have to suddenly think about, is it worth expanding into these cold areas immediately to dissipate the heat from your base, or is it worth doing other things? Is it worth using these new buildings and critters that function best in cold environments and at risk of your dupes, rather than heating everything up or having it be a normal sort of hospitable temperature for your duplicants? It seems like a lot of that logic from Spaced Out is being followed through here, albeit less of a focus on entirely new game systems, which I think is fine. It's a smaller scale DLC. So, what would I like to see from DLCs going forward? Honestly, I really want to see combustion. I want to see combustions and explosions. We fill our bases with hydrogen gas and natural gas. Why is there not a chance of that exploding and backfiring on us? Like, let the duplicants manufacture like little TNT packets or something they use to blow out like chunks on the map instead of digging with their guns. Like, make it so you don't have to pick a digger. You can just make explosives instead with a process and various materials, like making the blast shots and demolish your surroundings that way. But at the same time, have to think about the safety of all of these different materials around you. Like, can you afford to have all of this go up in flames? Is that safe for your duplicants? Is it safe for critters? What if there were critters that started fires? Yeah. So overall, I think from the future DLCs, I'm looking for more gameplay systems like radiation. I think that was a really neat addition that adds a lot of meaningful choices to what you do. And I'm hoping we see more of that sort of fundamental game concept-y sort of stuff. And again, with a DLC, you can have it as a sort of optional system if you want. I'm aware that there's often cases where games come out with 1 million DLCs and they have 1 million different isolated gameplay systems that never actually interact. I don't think Oxygen Not Included would ever get to that stage. I think they've still got a little bit of scope to add a few more mechanics and then perhaps start tying them into each other a bit more after the DLCs come out. Like, if they release, say, a DLC every year or so, they've got time to tie these systems all together and make sure that you have a sensible gameplay experience that doesn't feel like you're missing something if you have only, say, 2 of the 4 DLCs. I think Clay will do a good job with that. So yeah, those are just my thoughts on what I liked from the Spaced Out DLC and what I'm looking forward to in future DLCs. If you like what you've seen today, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We do lots of Oxygen Not Included based discussion content, meme content, build guides, designs. We stream a lot on Twitch as well. We have a lot of streamed runs in various different circumstances. We've done a lot of stuff on the Spaced Out asteroids. It's going to be weird that the new playthrough is going to have a different icon than the Spaced Out icon on the thumbnail. It feels like I've had that in there for years. But yeah, thanks a lot for hanging out. It means a lot that you guys enjoy watching my stuff, and I'll see you soon. Take it away, Whiskers.
Whiskers sends thanks to the following Twitch subscribers and YouTube members: 999999999, FRD. Grey Area, Neo Deus Machina, Sinister Plank, Sweet Danger Kitty, The Back Guy, The Max Not Binary, and Uglavisk.